Welcome to the project launch webinar for the Building Resilient Tourism Futures project. My name is Ahmed Ali. I'll be your MC for the webinar. Just a quick brief agenda. We'll have brief words of welcome from SPTO CEO, Mr. Christopher Cocker, who is on my right, and followed by opening remarks by Ms. Venus Reyes, who is the Acting Deputy Public Diplomacy Officer at the US Embassy in Fiji. We'll then hand over to Graham Jackson and Katie James from the Travel Foundation to provide an overview of the project going forward. Without much further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Cocker to present his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Ahmad. Warm Pacific greetings to all of you and our colleagues from across the region and across the globe. It will probably be good morning and also good evening or good afternoon to all our colleagues. Welcome to the project launch webinar for Building Resilient Tourism Futures project. I also like to extend a warm welcome to Vanessa Reyes, who is the public diplomacy specialist from the US Embassy, as well as colleague Saula, as well as Mr. Tony Grobel, who's the Charge d'Affaires from the US Embassy, who will be joining us later at the end of the webinar. These are our funding partners for the project under the US Embassy's Economic Recovery Grant, as well as to Graham and also Katie, good evening and welcome as well from the Travel Foundation, who are collaborating partners on this project. SPTO has been very keen in ensuring assistance provided to the private sector, especially the tourism SMEs, because basically more than 85% of our tourism businesses are SMEs in our member countries, and especially in the current pandemic, the SMEs are some of the most severely impacted in this case. In these trying times, we need to change and think outside the box. And I think this is basically in developing products and experiences that are reflective of our uniqueness as Pacific Island country destinations and our people, as well as endeavor to provide innovative links to potentially new markets as we move forward post-COVID-19. I think just briefly on the highlights of the project objectives, it's to ensure SMEs are better equipped to develop and adapt products and experiences to meet rapidly evolving markets such as the US, New Zealand, Australia, and other international markets, as well as to increase the understanding of the international businesses, how diverse our Pacific Island countries are and the potential to do business with us, and the challenges that our SMEs are currently facing in our region in trying to sell to them and to adapt operational practices to remove barriers to entry. The beneficiaries of the project are initially focused on 5 of our Pacific Island countries, which is Fiji, Kiribati, Nauru, Tonga, and Tuvalu. But we have the intention of making this toolkit also available to our other countries across the region once the toolkit is developed. The target in the tourism sector at the moment is our experience and excursion SMEs. And when the Are You Ready for Recovery Toolkit is developed from this project, it will help the SMEs prepare for border reopening in this case. In terms of short-term objectives, of course, it's focused on building the knowledge and skills of our SMEs, particularly on immediately to help them prepare for post-COVID-19 recovery. Also to enhance their skills in innovation, and also to highlight community-level actions benefiting our SMEs. From a long-term and big picture from SPTO's perspective and then our overall strategic direction, it supports the core of SPTO's work, which is our region's vision in our strategic plan, our Pacific Island countries empowered and benefiting from sustainable tourism when it's achieved. We also strive to achieve the UN SDGs and also support SPTO's digital transformation of our member countries in the next few years. And finally, we are in the process of developing our Pacific Sustainable Tourism Policy Framework, which is supportive of that too. So in conclusion, I'm sure that the participants, particularly the SMEs, will find interest in what we're looking to develop, and I encourage you to provide feedback. Feedback is very valuable in the development of this toolkit to ensure that it's responsive to your needs and will benefit you in moving forward. I'd like to remind you all that the toolkit is not the outcome of this project. It is rather the enhanced capacity of our SMEs, providing experiences and excursions and strengthening linkages and partnerships. SPTO and the Travel Foundation remain committed to assisting you throughout this process. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'd like to now hand over to Ms. Venus Reyes, Deputy Public Diplomacy Specialist, to provide her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it is wonderful to be here with you today at the project launch webinar of this webinar, organized by the Pacific Tourism Organization and the Travel Foundation. I want to thank all of the organizations and small to medium enterprises joining us today. The pandemic-related economic disruptions have caused an unprecedented global crisis. Important and tourism-dependent island economies, unfortunately, have not been spared. Island communities are among the most vulnerable to climate change. Their economic resilience is increasingly threatened by more frequent and severe storms, rising sea levels, and warming ocean temperatures. The grant from the US Embassy funding this project today will allow SPTO to work with the small tourism businesses in Fiji, Kiribati, Nauru, Tuvalu, and Tonga, as well as other Pacific locations to build their capacity to respond to the new reality for tourism post-COVID-19. The project will also develop a toolkit, as Chris already mentioned, designed specially for the Pacific SMEs to respond, adapt, diversify, understand, and meet evolving international tourism in a regionally relevant context. In the long term, it will also improve the capacity for ongoing innovation, enabling tourism providers to be more sustainable, adaptive as tourism and the products and services these destinations can offer continues to evolve. So from the pandemic to the climate crisis, these problems can only be solved by nations working together. We, as nations, simply cannot do it alone. We need to work together. We believe it is now more important than ever for us to leverage our cooperation to address the economic and humanitarian consequences of the pandemic and the climate crisis. Thank you to SPTO, the Travel Foundation, and all present for your commitment to build more resilient, more sustainable, and more responsive tourism sector.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reyes. I'd like to now hand over to our partners in this project, the Travel Foundation. I'll hand over to Graham Jackson, the Head of Partnerships for the Travel Foundation, to give us an overview of the project. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thanks also for your opening remarks. We'd also like to just add how pleased we are to be here today with you all, and also how happy we are to be collaborating on this project. So the title of our presentation today and the title of this launch of the toolkit that you've heard about is How Can Pacific Tourism SMEs Bounce Back Stronger? And just before I begin, and without wishing to throw a spanner in the works of my own presentation's title, I'd just like to question that for a minute. Do we really want tourism to bounce back, or do we want it to bounce forward? And there is quite a subtle but important difference in that statement. Now, since the almost total shutdown of global tourism, there's been a global conversation happening around building back better or building forward better. But quite what that looks like, and especially how we can achieve that, are very complex challenges. And there's perhaps one question that's useful for us to ask as we address this challenge, as we move forward. And while it's quite a simple question, it may seem quite obvious, it can lead to some quite transformative thinking. So I'd just like to invite you all for a moment to consider this question, just within your own context. Why do we want tourism? What is it we want for our destination? Apart from the obvious, apart from jobs, apart from income, let's take those as a given, but let's look beyond it. Do we want tourism for tourism's sake? Do we want to grow tourism for growth's sake? let's think about things like quality and value. Terms like this, they're quite subjective in many cases. Who really decides what quality tourism is and what is valued? What do communities value from hosting visitors, and how can their voices be brought to the decision-making table? This is really an opportunity to define our own better, and better really perhaps means shaking up some of the status quo and moving forwards in brave ways of reinventing ourselves, of being bold, and really putting residents and community needs front and center of tourism development. So here at the Travel Foundation, we've been advocating for this change for around about 20 years. And we think that now is possibly the best time and possibly the most urgent time. Excuse me, my slides seem to be skipping all over the place. Is now perhaps the most urgent time for this change to happen. So just to give you a bit of an idea about some of our global efforts on that front. In summer 2020, at the height of the pandemic, we got together with 5 other global NGOs working on this issue to unite and to unite around 13 guiding principles for what a better future of tourism actually looks like. And these principles attempt to define and reframe success for tourism, how that success is managed, and importantly, to help build towards a world where communities are at the front and center of tourism's future. Now, we're not alone in this. We've been joined by more than 450 destinations, tourism businesses, large and small, NGOs, community groups, some of which you'll just see here, who are very keen to endorse this vision and commit to making that vision a reality. And we welcome any of you to engage with this movement and find out more. We can share the links with you afterwards. But I think the important thing is that what we found through doing this and through having these conversations, through building this movement, is that this is a vision that's shared by many. And I know that the hosts of this call really echo this in their work. I know that the Pacific Tourism Organization is laying out its own ambitious goals to define a sustainable, more inclusive, more harmonious path forward for tourism in the region. And we really applaud its effort and commitment to doing that, and find ourselves very philosophically aligned with their work. Now, as Chris mentioned, small businesses do make up the majority of tourism activity in the region, and are really the lifeblood of the tourism sector in the Pacific and also in so many other places in the world. So it's really imperative that you all are supported and championed to play your critical role in delivering this better future. And so, as I said, we are very pleased to be working in some small way on this project, supported by the US Embassy in partnership with the Pacific Tourism Organization, to help tourism SMEs and those that work with them understand and adapt to the new normal, help to position themselves for a robust and resilient recovery. And I'd like to thank you all today for taking time out of your busy schedules to hear more about this. I hope that you'll find this short session both interesting and inspirational. I'm going to hand over in a moment to my colleague, Katie James, who's been very much working at the coalface of this project, to share with you a little bit more about what we're doing, what we've already found out. So hopefully you can utilize some of that information from today, and also what the next steps are in this process. So thank you very much. I'll hand over now to Katie.
Hi everyone, and thanks Graham. I'm just going to share my screen. Hold on a second. Okay. Let's just make it big. Okay, great. Hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, as Graham said, I am just going to go through with you today a bit of background on the Are You Ready for Recovery Toolkit, So how it came about and who it's kind of aimed at and what it's covering altogether. And as part of the process of researching for putting this toolkit together, over the past few months, we've been interviewing a lot of international tour operators to really get their perspective on emerging trends in the tourism sector in the wake of last year, which was, yeah, everybody knows what happened, the COVID pandemic. So yeah, I thought it'd be useful to share some early insights from that research on the trends that people have noted, and also take the time to hopefully provide you with some useful first tips to help you respond to some of the trends that we're seeing. So the Are You Ready for Recovery Toolkit is really, it builds on a previous bit of work that we did at the Travel Foundation called Are You Ready for Business? And that was aimed at small businesses, mostly attraction and excursion providers, to give them practical tips and guidance for enhancing their product and kind of streamlining their business operations to support them to successfully kind of connect to the tourism market and ultimately improve their livelihood through tourism. So that toolkit has already been rolled out in various destinations, including a few Caribbean islands over the past few years. And this year, as part of a wider initiative to support post-COVID recovery in the tourism sector, we've kind of adapted this toolkit to create the recovery toolkit with an emphasis on supporting SMEs to recover and rebuild after the pandemic. So yeah, it provides practical tips and guidance, and it's really aimed at building the knowledge and skills of SMEs to respond, adapt and diversify to meet evolving market trends. And really to support SMEs to optimize their product, to be in the best position to access the market and recover quickly once tourism arrivals do pick up again. And also any existing content and modules that we had, so on things like health and safety and pricing and contracting, they've been updated to contextualize into the current context and ensure that small businesses are complying with kind of international protocols and best practice around COVID, and ensure that they're in line with customer expectations. So these are kind of some of the key topics that will be covered in the toolkit. So emerging trends and how you can respond, health and safety, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is really key at the moment, and will be in as the sector continues to rebuild. So pricing and contracting, creating and embedding sustainability, customer communications and digital marketing, which again is becoming increasingly important, I think, in the sector and particularly in a post-COVID environment. And also delivering excellent customer service. Okay, so I'll just go into now some of the trends, some of the key trends that we've kind of identified from our research with tour operators over the past few months. And really, it's not so much that we have that COVID's created lots of new trends and new interests. It's actually more that what we've seen is that COVID has actually just accelerated lots of trends that already existed. So yeah, if you can see, there's a quote here from somebody at TUI Group, who are obviously a really big international tour operator. And they've said exactly that they're seeing trends that were already there that are now just moving a lot quicker. And actually things that for them as quite a mass market operator, things that used to be perhaps more niche or more specialized are now just becoming more mainstream. So it's a lot about authentic experiences, unique experiences, sustainability, and I'll go into all of these in a bit more detail as we go on. And then there's another quote here from the sustainability editor of Condé Nast magazine. And she is saying, yeah, luxury is no longer about the 5-star resort, but actually it's more about the transformative experience. So yeah, lots of operators we spoke to really think that actually a tourist appetite for kind of adventure and discovery is going to be at an all-time high after COVID, given that people have spent, you know, so long now cooped up in their own homes and in their own localities. So yeah, we're seeing, well, we've heard from a lot of tour operators that they're expecting a bigger appetite for adventure. And this is actually translated as well into excursion preferences. So we've seen that over the past few years in general, tourists seem to be buying and going on more excursions per holiday than they were before. And this is particularly true in the past year alone. So from tour operators I've spoken to in destinations where actually there has still been some tourism taking over in the past year, they said they've seen a real increase in tourists doing more excursions. So that's quite interesting, and also a really good sign, I think, for small businesses going forward. So again, on trends, a really big one to note for the foreseeable future, I think, is the appetite for smaller group tours and even private tours. And this, again, is something that's been happening over the past few years, but is it being, you know, even more accelerated at the moment. And as you can imagine, that is in some ways because, you know, due to COVID concerns, people want to spend less time in a really big group now. But also the private tours kind of fulfill a growing interest in, you know, having something more bespoke and a more tailored experience. So for tourists on a smaller or private tour, it really gives them the opportunity to, you know, get to know the guide, to ask questions, to really feel like they're getting an insider's perspective of the destination. And that's considered a lot more, you know, a more immersive and authentic experience than your kind of standard group tour on a big tour bus that, you know, they churn out however many per week and everybody gets the same experience. So I think there's a real move away from that and people looking for something a bit more specialized and a bit more bespoke. So if you are an organization that offers tours, really, you know, make sure that you think about the options you're providing for customers going forward. So perhaps if you just, you know, usually do the same tour however many times per week, have a think about how you can maybe adapt this and diversify it and think about offering smaller groups, or even have, you know, an advert on your notice board on your website to let people know that they can, if they want, book a different experience, a tailored tour, you know, something more unique with your business that will be different to the kind of mainstream. Okay, so another trend is sustainable products and experiences. And this really seems to have come to the fore since COVID. So yeah, I think this has been, again, a growing trend, but more and more people now are looking for you know, sustainable products when they're buying their holidays. Last year, I think, yeah, a 2020 survey from Exodus said that 78% of travelers consider themselves to be more ethically conscious now than they were a year ago. And Booking.com have reported recently around, yeah, 3/4 of travelers intend to stay in green accommodation when they go away. And this kind of conscientious traveler mindset is being led by millennials, and especially millennial families. And also what we've seen is there's a real growing emphasis on this kind of travel for consumers in China and India. And I imagine they're both source markets that are going to be of growing importance for operators in the South Pacific. So that's something to note. And another thing that we found is, yeah, another survey done last year stated that 1/3 of US travelers said they would actually pay more for travel providers who demonstrate environmental responsibility. So that kind of demonstrates that consumers are also willing to translate their intentions into booking practices, or kind of, I guess, put their money where their mouth is, if you like. So as a business, I think a tip would be to really start thinking about the products that you use and how sustainable or not they are, maybe. So, for example, particularly around things like single-use plastic, where there's a really big spotlight on the use, or well, overuse of single-use plastic in the tourism sector at the moment. And actually, I've heard a lot of tour operators saying that they're now mainly, well, not mainly, but some of the negative feedback they're getting on tours is less about the tour itself, but more about things like the amount of plastic that's being used. So yeah, that's something to really keep in mind and think about what you're using, and think, you know, what can be changed. You know, if you are using a lot of plastic, how can you minimize it? Can you switch to other products? You know, if you're giving out food and drinks, can you switch to natural products like things like calabash and coconut? And this would also kind of tick off a lot of kind of interests of tourists, because it would give them a kind of more authentic experience, a cultural experience, but also using sustainable products. So have a think about what you're using so far, and you know, it's quite, some very small changes can actually have a really big impact. And same goes for, you know, if you're an accommodation provider, are you doing anything to reduce energy use and save water, save electricity? If not, can you make some small changes? And the key around all of this is, if you are, then make sure people know this. So put this on, you know, your websites. Let tour operators know this, that you have switched to sustainable products, or you're implementing measures to reduce your energy use, because it will be really appealing for customers and will, you know, differentiate you from competitors and help you sell more products to tour operators and direct to tourists. Okay, so another trend that I think has been particularly kind of elevated since the pandemic hit last year is more and more people saying that they want to choose tourism experiences that are giving back to local communities. So 67% of travellers want their travel choices to support the destination's recovery efforts, and want to see how their money is going back into local communities. So I think the pandemic has really made consumers aware of the impact it's had on small businesses and small communities, and people are looking to use their holiday as a way of giving back, which is great. So, you know, and more I think tour operators are looking for ways that they can integrate these kind of models of giving back to communities within their holiday experiences. So yeah, there's a quote there from a tour operator, and they said they've seen a rise in people seeking kind of deeper community connections through tourism. So for you as a business, even it might not seem like this is something you could do quite quickly, but even if you are not a business that explicitly is in community tourism or is providing a community element, there might be ways that you can still demonstrate to consumers how your product and your business is supporting the community. So it could be, you know, something as small as, you know, do you employ local people? Do you have training schemes, for example, that you recruit local people and they can be employed in future? Or, you know, you might want to think about using your business, your experience, your tour as a way for collecting tourism donations towards a community project or community activity. Obviously, this would need to be something that you decide in conjunction with the local community, and would need to, you know, some thinking about how you manage it appropriately. But yeah, if that is something you can do, then it's a really good way of leveraging tourism's potential for supporting communities and supporting the rebuilding after COVID, and also tapping into this, new kind of desire for tourists to see the benefits of their tourism, of their spend in destination, I guess. Okay, so authentic and unique experiences. So I feel like I've already spoken about authentic experiences a lot, and really, yeah, I mean, all the tour operators we're speaking to, they just say authentic, authentic, authentic. That's what they want. That's what their customers want. And I mean, yeah, you can kind of see how it's a word that's starting to be overused in a way. And, sometimes the more you say it, the more it can come across as inauthentic. So I think, I would avoid labeling everything as authentic for the sake of labeling it as authentic if it's not. But it's more thinking about how you tell your story to customers, and are there historical or cultural elements that you can speak about? How is the product you're offering different to similar ones? What are you doing that's unique? And yeah, really thinking again about those personal connections and connecting directly to the tourist. So thinking about how to sell your story and what makes it special, and how it stands out from the crowd would be useful. Okay, so food is the next one, and gastronomy tourism was really on the ascendancy. It has been in the last few years. I think potentially in the very short term there might be a slight dip, because people are a bit more hesitant to go out, to busier places and the places where they're in close proximity to people. But I think really, as restrictions ease and as vaccination programs progress, I think this will continue to be really popular. And it's a big reason, people put it at the top of their list for their holiday experience a lot of the time now. So 71% of travelers eating local food is now an important component. I think there was another survey I saw that said tourists, that was the second most important thing they were looking for on holiday, was the chance to try new food. And yeah, it really, gastronomy ticks off a lot of boxes. So it provides an immersive and authentic experience for people. It allows a tourist to discover more about the history and culture of a place through its food and learn the history of local cuisine. Also, it's a great way of supporting small businesses through local products and ensuring that you're using local food. And so, yeah, I think if for anyone that is not including food at all in their experience, which you might not be, then it could be something that you consider adding in. It's worth remembering that for tourists, for most tourists, when they're trying any local food, it will be very, very different to what they usually eat. So that in itself, in a way, is a cultural experience for them, and can be something that for you might not seem very exciting, but actually can be really a really interesting and really fulfilling part of their experience and their trip in the destination. So again, just think about when you are providing food, can you weave in any anecdotes about the history, about the culture surrounding those types of foods, those dishes? It's just good to provide as much information as you can on the kind of background, the customs and the preparation of food to make it a really interesting for tourists. And also, again, if you are using local produce, which I imagine a lot of people will be, then really let tourists know about this. There's a growing demand for things like farm to table experiences, where people try food. All the food is from a certain radius or vicinity to the place. So that's really interesting and kind of taps into trends for more like health and well-being experiences as well. So yeah, I would really, anything that you have relating to food and drink, I think will be really popular and worth making the most of that. Okay, and just a few other trends I'll just touch on really quickly. Again, that came out of these interviews with tour operators. So, and particularly around the types of excursions people are looking for. So seems to be a growing demand for culture and heritage, for nature. I think the pandemic has inspired a return to nature for many people who, are suddenly spending more time outside to exercise, avoid public transport, things like that. And that seems to have spilled over into travel preferences, with lots of people requesting more nature-based experiences. And the same goes for adventure. As I mentioned at the beginning, it seems like people have a bigger appetite at the moment for trying new things when they're on holiday. So again, just to think about these types of experiences and interests that people are looking for, and how you can perhaps tweak what you're offering to make sure that you're incorporating some of these elements. So particularly in the short to medium term, it might be that if you are doing tours, ensuring that as much as possible are done outside, so people are feeling a bit more secure because they're in open air, and also that they're having a kind of outdoorsy experience. And again, just when you are on your website, when you're selling these experiences, think about how, making sure that you get these kind of keywords and phrases into your promotion. So things like open air, connecting to nature, thrill-seeking adventure. So yeah, there's a few kind of, think about the type of words and phrases tourists will be using when they're searching for these experiences, and try and put them on your website or use them in your brochures as much as possible to tap into these trends. Okay, so lastly then, on trends, not so exciting, but unfortunately really, really important at the moment. And I would say underlying all of the other trends I've just discussed is the importance of adhering to COVID health and safety protocols, and showing how you're taking steps to ensure the safety and security of tourists when they're visiting your business, or when they're taking part in your tour, your excursion. A Euromonitor survey last year found that offering a safe destination was the #1 most important attribute that a travel company could provide to a consumer. So I think this is really at the forefront of people's minds, and will be, at least in the short to medium term. So it's really key that you make sure your protocols and procedures are up to date and in line with local recommendations, and really that you've got a lot of visible signs in place so tourists can see exactly what you're doing and that you're taking it seriously. So, things like hand sanitization stations, probably face masks and social distancing for a while, making sure as well that your staff are really well trained on any protocols that you have in place, and that they are adhering to them in a consistent way. And also it's worth having a space to show other less visible kind of changes you've made. So things like that you have contactless payments, that you maybe have digital menus, that you have risk assessments in place for COVID. And these could be maybe, listed in a specific section on your website. I'm sure you've all noticed that pretty much every organization at the moment seems to have a COVID special segment. But yeah, it's useful to just show, so a customer before they come, before they book, they can see that you are, taking this seriously, and that they are going to be in a COVID safe environment when they're with you. Okay, so just to end on some hopefully reasons to be cheerful. So what we found a lot is customers have been requesting from tour operators longer, so particularly for next year, so perhaps beyond this year now, but particularly for next year and beyond, that people are looking for fewer but longer trips. And as I've mentioned, in particular, lots of people are looking for these once in a lifetime bucket list experiences. So really, you know, their kind of top dream trip, and trying lots of new things. And I think this is really positive for South Pacific destinations who really adhere to these interests. So, you know, once in a lifetime bucket list, having a really unique experience, kind of discovering a new unique culture. So I think that will be really important for South Pacific going forward. Also that, yeah, to just keep in mind this growing thread that customers are really looking for that personal connection. So to a local community, even for products, businesses, experiences. So yeah, in any way that you can kind of weave this into these types of opportunities into your product and into the way that you talk and market your product would be really, really useful. And also just to say again that it's really millennials and Generation Z that are at the forefront of these trends. And they are probably the groups that are most likely to start traveling extensively again when everything picks up. And they are younger, so they're going to be traveling for longer. And they're really pushing these sustainability trends. So anything you do in your marketing, it's really worthwhile to make sure you're targeting those groups. And that will probably mean ensuring that you have a quite active online presence. So, I mean, maybe a website, but particularly social media, particularly Instagram. There seem to be more and more businesses who are successfully connecting to customers directly through these kind of channels, and that often results in direct bookings. So yeah, that's something to really focus on. And I think, yeah, I mean, although we all want tourism to start again as quickly as possible, at least in the short term, while it is a bit slower, it gives you time to really focus on some of these areas, maybe elevate your digital marketing, and have a think about what small tweaks you might be able to make to your business to tap into some of these trends, so that you're in a really, really good and strong position to build back quickly and build back better when it all starts again, fingers crossed. So that's it from me for now. So I will hand back to Graham.
Thanks, Katie. And as we said, you know, this is a kind of early peek as to, you know, what is to come in the toolkit, which will be launching in June. Could you just pop those slides up again, Katie? I've just got one last slide to share with everyone, and then we welcome your. I think we'll welcome your questions then, unless Eamon has anything else to add in there. But yeah, I think generally what we're hearing from the conversations we're having on a daily basis with operators in Europe, in the US, in Australia and New Zealand is that as Katie started, you know, the trends are accelerating. Stuff that was happening before COVID that we were all kind of aware of that were coming, that we're starting to gather ahead of steam are still there. They've not gone away. They've got more, and they are. We're just seeing a lot more demand for these sorts of things that ultimately we really believe that your region can offer. So, you know, I think that's something that everyone should be really positive about. And as Katie said, now is the time to start thinking about how can we make those improvements that we need to really capitalize on this, and this tool will help you to do that. So I'm just going to very quickly just outline the next steps. So we're still in the midst of interviews. We're still collecting market intelligence that will all go into that report, into that toolkit. We will be carrying out some focus groups with participants from the beneficiary countries in the coming weeks to make sure that the content of the toolkit is really tailored for the specific needs and context of those destinations. We'll also be looking at what SME support already exists in those places and how this toolkit can be plugged in to those, so we can ensure that it gets into the hands of small businesses in the right ways. We're also beginning to go back to those people that we've spoken to and actually present back to them a market opportunities report. So in effect, they're telling us what it is they want, and then we're going to respond to them and say, well, the South Pacific has these things, and this is a kind of, give them an idea of what already exists and what's being developed. So hopefully create those market connections. We'll be finalising the toolkit once we have all of that input, and ultimately we'll be sharing this with you in the summer. So there will be, the toolkit will be made available, and there will be another webinar, which will be more of a training to sort of go into a bit more detail on some of this stuff, which we hope will have a lot of participation. So that's it from us. I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say, Ahmed, or unless we go to questions, but I'll hand back to Ahmed for a minute.
It doesn't seem like anybody has any questions, which means that the presentations were really informative.
We've already answered them all, I guess, yeah.
Yes. As Graham mentioned, in terms of the next steps, we'll be working with the 5 countries as part of the project moving forward with Kiribati, Fiji, Nauru, Tonga, and Tuvalu to create country working groups and get insight in terms of how the toolkit can be developed to be region specific. If you're from these countries and would like to participate, please do get in contact with your national tourism officers, and we'll be working through them on this. Just going back to what Katie presented, there's some really great insights there, and we'll be looking to share this in due course. But just something for small businesses to think about is how you can start adapting your businesses to be more environmentally friendly in terms of plastic use and things like that, and how you can look to gear tourism towards experiential and immersive experiences.